What if the
Man,
man everyone
there you
ignored,
go,
a
right?
janitor
I can help.
quietly mopping the
Oh, thank
floor,
you. You
ended up
just
saving the
collapsed me and
life of
get
a
us to the
billionaire's
hospital
only
immediately.
son? Sometimes, heroes don't wear suits or badges. They wear work gloves and carry compassion in their hearts. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The sun had already slipped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains when the last customers left the Maplewood Inn. From the street, its windows glowed like amber lanterns above the cobblestones, the kind of light that made strangers pause and think about home. Inside, the scent of roasted garlic and fresh bread lingered, mixed with faint notes of jazz from a speaker near the bar. Beyond the glitter and chatter, a man in a navy blue uniform pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway, his footsteps soft, deliberate, as though he didn't want to disturb the memories that hung in the air. His name was Elias Carter, 38, night janitor. To the world, he was invisible, a quiet figure, sweeping away crumbs and fingerprints after other people's perfect evenings. Yet in that stillness, something gentle lived inside him. Every polished glass, every spotless corner felt like a promise kept. He didn't talk much at work, but everyone who passed him sensed a kind of patience in the way he moved, the kind that only comes from someone who has already lost too much. Outside, a fine drizzle misted the parking lot. Elias pulled his jacket tight and breathed in the smell of wet asphalt and maple leaves. Asheville's October nights always carried that mix of cool rain and wood smoke, comforting, almost holy. Across the street, an old church bell rang 8 times. He smiled faintly. It reminded him that somewhere, under the same rain, his daughter would be finishing her homework and waiting for his call. Just 2 hours earlier, he'd left her at Mrs. Delaney's cottage. The old woman lived 3 doors down from them and adored little Lily like her own granddaughter. She'd made cocoa for them both, as she always did, and reminded Elias not to forget the town's harvest fair next week. Lily had pressed her palms against his cheeks before he left. "Promise you'll be home before I fall asleep," she'd whispered. He'd kissed her forehead and answered the same way every night. "More than all the stars in the Carolina sky, sweetheart." That promise was the quiet engine of his life. He worked not for pride or ambition, but for time to keep that promise, time to watch his daughter grow stronger. 7 years ago, after the accident that took his wife, time had become his only treasure. Back then, he had been an emergency technician, rushing through city streets with sirens howling and adrenaline burning through his veins. He had saved lives for a living, until one night, he couldn't save the one that mattered most. When Lily was born with a weak heart, he left the flashing lights behind. Now, he saved moments instead of people. He mopped the marble floor until it gleamed. Through the doorway, he could see the dining room, where empty tables reflected chandeliers like pools of gold. A waiter counted tips at the bar. The hostess reheated her coffee. Somewhere in the kitchen, pans clanged and laughter broke through the fatigue. Elias listened with quiet fondness. It was comforting, the rhythm of ordinary life continuing without him needing to fix it. At the end of the corridor stood a velvet curtain leading to the VIP dining room. Behind it, voices murmured low, cultured, the kind of tone that belonged to people who never checked price tags. He didn't look their way. It wasn't part of his job to notice who came or went, only to keep the world clean after they passed through. Still, as he wiped the glass railing, he caught a reflection of a small boy laughing at something his mother said. The laughter was soft but pure, and for a moment, Elias's heart ached. He couldn't help thinking of Lily's giggle when he tickled her under the chin. He turned away quickly and continued his work, telling himself not to drift into memories. When closing hour came, he rolled his cart to the supply room, washed his hands, and stepped outside for a breath of cool air. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under lamplight. He leaned against the brick wall, listening to the distant hum of traffic. Asheville at night had its own rhythm, cars whispering by, the occasional laugh from a nearby diner, the far-off sound of a freight train threading through the valley. He thought of calling Lily, just to say goodnight, but stopped himself. She'd be asleep by now, tucked beneath the quilt Mrs. Delaney had sewn, dreaming of school fairs and paper lanterns. He imagined her small chest rising and falling, steady and strong. That image alone kept him steady. Back inside, He checked the final checklist on his clipboard, signed his initials, and placed it on the manager's desk. Every night ended this way, quietly, neatly, as if the world could be made right by order and attention. He believed that. Maybe that's why he liked this job, because cleanliness had a rhythm, a certainty that life itself no longer offered. When Elias clocked out, the street outside the Maplewood Inn was nearly empty. A line of parked cars glistened under the amber street lamps, and rainwater trickled into the storm drains with a sound like soft applause. He walked slowly toward his truck, an old silver Chevy that coughed every time it started. Before turning the key, he took a moment just to listen to the crickets behind the trees, to the faint gospel song coming from a nearby porch radio, to the steady pulse of the town that had quietly adopted him. He remembered his first night in Asheville, years ago, when grief had felt heavier than the boxes in his truck bed. The locals had offered him directions, warm pie, and unhurried kindness. That was how this place worked. People nodded to one another on sidewalks, strangers waved from passing cars, and even the wind seemed to say, "You're safe here." It wasn't where he was born, but it had become where his heart could rest. A soft buzz came from his phone, a message from Mrs. Delaney. "Lily's asleep. She asked me to tell you she counted the stars tonight. She stopped at 100 and said that was enough for you both." He smiled, reading it twice. Then he typed, "Tell her I love her more than all 100, and the rest." Driving home, he kept one hand on the wheel and one on the old rosary that hung from his rearview mirror, not so much out of faith as out of habit. The radio played an old Glenn Campbell song, the kind that filled the cab with warmth. Through the windshield, the highway curved gently along the mountains, headlights tracing ribbons of light through the mist. He passed the empty fairgrounds where wooden booths waited for next weekend's harvest fair. Colorful banners flapped in the night breeze, promising cider, bluegrass, and laughter. He thought maybe this year he'd take Lily. Maybe they'd ride the Ferris wheel at sunset, and for once he'd let himself enjoy the view instead of worrying about what could go wrong. The truck's tires hummed over the bridge near the river. Down below, the water reflected scattered lights from town, flickering like memories. He thought of his wife then, of Sarah's laugh, of her steady hands guiding him when he first learned to hold a newborn heartbeat against his chest. Her absence no longer felt like a wound, just a quiet room he carried inside. Sometimes he caught himself talking to her in small ways. "You'd like how strong Lily's gotten, love. You'd be proud." By the time he reached the little rental house at the end of Maple Street, the rain had turned to fog. Porch pumpkins glowed beside the railing, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon. Inside, everything was still except for the ticking kitchen clock and the soft breathing from Lily's room. He hung his jacket, washed his hands, and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. Her small fingers curled around the stuffed bear she'd carried since she was 3. Elias knelt beside the bed, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and whispered, "Sleep easy, my star counter." The words were part prayer, part promise. Later, sitting on the porch with a mug of reheated coffee, he looked out at the neighborhood. Porch lights blinked off one by one, and somewhere far away a train horn echoed through the valley. Life here moved slow, like a hymn sung under breath. And for a man who once lived by sirens, that slowness was a kind of salvation. He leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath him, and felt the cool air settle around his shoulders. The world was quiet again, almost too quiet. In the distance, faint laughter drifted from the inn's direction, followed by the soft roll of thunder beyond the mountains. Elias didn't know it yet, but that sound marked the start of a night that would test everything he'd learned about paying attention. Somewhere behind the warm lights of the Maplewood Inn, fate was already setting the stage. And while Elias sat beneath his porch roof, sipping coffee and watching the fog crawl through the trees, a child's laughter, the same one he'd heard earlier that evening, seemed to echo again in his mind. Gentle but urgent, like a reminder that peace never lasts forever. The same rain that wrapped Asheville in silver mist that night also slid down the tall windows of the Maplewood Inn's private dining room. Inside, candles flickered over polished silverware, the jazz pianist in the corner keeping time with the soft murmur of conversation. At the center table sat Margaret Hale, a woman who looked as if she had never known uncertainty. Her posture was straight, her tone measured, her every movement deliberate. Power followed her like a shadow. To the public, she was the mind behind Hale Biotechnologies, a CEO whose signature could move markets and whose face graced business magazines. But behind the glass walls that separated her from the rest of the restaurant, she looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from lack of sleep, but the kind that came from years of holding her breath. Across from her, Noah, her 10-year-old son, sat quietly. His small suit jacket hung loosely over his thin frame and his brown hair fell across his forehead. He was sketching something on the back of the kids' menu, a house with a tall oak tree and two figures holding hands. Underneath he had written in careful block letters, "Home someday." "Eat a little, sweetheart," Margaret said, her voice soft but strained. The boy shook his head. "I'm not hungry," she sighed and reached for her wine glass. The stem felt cold between her fingers. Across the table, her assistant Diana Brooks glanced up from her phone, eyes sharp as always. "He's been quiet all week, ma'am. Maybe you should—" "I've spoken to Dr. Morrison," Margaret interrupted gently. "He says it's nothing serious. Just a stomach bug." Diana hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." But when she looked at Noah's pale face, worry clouded her expression. The boy pressed one hand against his right side, wincing slightly. Margaret noticed. She wanted to ignore it, to believe the doctor's words, but a knot began to form in her chest. For a moment, she stared past the table, through the glass partition, into the hallway beyond. There, just visible, was a man in a janitor's uniform pushing a cart. The dim light caught the shine on the mop handle as he moved slow, steady, unseen. Something about that quiet rhythm drew her attention. She watched for a few seconds before turning back to her son. "Do you remember the harvest fair?" she asked softly. "It's next week. Maybe we can go, just the two of us." Noah looked up, surprised. "Really?" "Yes," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll make time." But even as she said it, she knew the calendar on her desk was already filled with meetings, flights, and deadlines. She hated how easily the lie came. Outside, the rain thickened. A thundercloud rolled low above the mountains, and for an instant the candlelight trembled. Margaret reached for her phone, scrolling through the dozens of unread messages from board members, investors, and journalists. Each one demanded something from her. None of them knew that the most important thing she owned was sitting right across the table, growing quieter with every passing minute. Noah set down his pencil and looked up. "Mom," he said softly, "can we go home now?" "In a minute, darling," she murmured, not looking up from her phone. He leaned back, watching her fingers move over the screen. When he pressed his side again, his hand trembled. Diana noticed first. "Ma'am?" Margaret looked up. The boy's lips had lost their color, his eyes dull. "Noah?" she whispered, suddenly forgetting the phone, the glass of wine, the world. He managed a weak smile. "It just hurts a little." "Where?" "Here." He pointed to his lower right side. Margaret's throat tightened. She waved for the floor manager. "Get the hotel medic, now." Moments later, the medic arrived, a man in a white shirt with a first aid badge and a practice comm. He felt Noah's forehead, checked his pulse, and said, "Probably a touch of low blood sugar, ma'am. He'll be fine after some rest." Margaret nodded, but something inside her didn't believe it. She'd learned to trust professionals all her life, doctors, lawyers, analysts, yet the instincts that had built her empire were now whispering that they were wrong. She placed a hand on her son's hair, feeling how warm his skin had become. He leaned into her touch and closed his eyes. Outside the door, the janitor she had glimpsed earlier slowed his steps. He couldn't hear their words, but the tone, the rhythm of concern carried through the wall. He paused for just a second, listening to the quiet panic that only parents recognize. Inside, Margaret sat frozen. The medic finished his brief exam, smiled reassuringly, and left. The room fell silent, except for the jazz and the rain. Noah's hand tightened around hers. "It really hurts, Mom." "Oh, I know, sweetheart," she whispered, forcing calm into her voice. "We'll go soon, I promise." But promises, she was beginning to realize, were fragile. Things easily made, easily broken, and sometimes too late to keep. The waiter hurried back with the bill, but Margaret didn't even glance at it. Her mind was fixed on the uneven rhythm of her son's breathing. The color had drained completely from his cheeks now, and sweat glistened along his hairline. She pressed a napkin to his forehead and whispered, we're leaving." Diana stood immediately, grabbing their coats.
I'll get the car.
"No," Margaret said sharply. "It's raining. He shouldn't walk outside." The hostess appeared with an umbrella, concern flickering in her eyes. "Ma'am, do you need help?" Margaret opened her mouth to answer, but just then Noah's small body curled forward, his hand clutching his side. The movement was so sudden it made the silverware rattle. Panic rushed through her like ice. "Call an ambulance," she said, voice low but urgent. "Now." The hostess froze for a heartbeat, then dashed toward the phone. Margaret lifted her son into her arms as best she could, feeling how hot and trembling he'd become. The boy's head fell against her shoulder. "It's okay, baby. I've got you," she whispered. Her heels clicked down the corridor, echoing through the near-empty restaurant. Behind her, a door swung open. The janitor she'd noticed earlier, Elias Carter, was stepping out with his cleaning cart. When he saw the woman carrying the child, instinct took over. "Ma'am, what happened?" His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes had already taken in everything. The pale lips, the shallow breathing, the hand pressed tight to the abdomen. "He's sick," Margaret managed. "The medic said it was nothing, but he's getting worse." Elias set down his cart and knelt beside them, lowering his ear toward the child's chest, his movements quick but gentle. "How long's he been hurting?" "Since yesterday," she said, her words trembling. "They told me it was a virus." "Was he nauseous? Feverish?" Yes, both." Elias looked up, his expression grave. "It could be his appendix. We can't wait for an ambulance. He needs to go to the hospital now." Margaret blinked, startled. "You're not a doctor." No," he said, meeting her gaze. "But I used to be an EMT. Trust me." The conviction in his tone left no room for doubt. He scooped Noah carefully from her arms and turned toward the front doors. "Where's your car?" "Out front," she said, already running beside him. The cold air hit them as they stepped outside. Rain slicked the pavement, reflecting the red glow of the restaurant sign. Elias shielded the boy with his jacket, while Margaret opened the back door of her sleek black sedan. He laid Noah gently across the seat, checked his pulse again, then looked at her. "You drive. I'll keep him steady." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Mission Hospital downtown," he said. "Yes, I know it." They sped away from the inn, the wipers struggling against the storm. Margaret gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Beside her, Elias kept one hand on the boy's shoulder, murmuring quiet reassurances. "Stay with us, buddy. You're doing great." In the flashes of passing headlights, Margaret could see his face focused, calm, entirely present. She couldn't remember the last time someone else had taken control so completely, or the last time she'd let them. Traffic lights blurred by, the streets nearly empty. Every minute stretched like an hour. Margaret's heart hammered as she drove faster than she ever had in her life. The rain was relentless, drumming on the roof like fate itself, urging them forward. Elias leaned closer to Noah, listening for breath. "He's fading," he said quietly. "Push through that next light." "I'm trying," she shouted, voice cracking. "You're doing fine," he said, his tone still even. "Just keep your eyes ahead." It struck her then how absurd this was. A janitor commanding the CEO of Hale Bio in her own car. Yet in that moment, titles meant nothing. There was only a mother, a child, and a man who understood the weight of seconds. As they crossed the bridge into downtown, sirens rose in the distance. Elias pressed his palm lightly to Noah's chest, counting silently under his breath. When the hospital lights appeared ahead, he finally exhaled. "Right there," he said, pointing. "Emergency entrance." Margaret swung the car into the drop-off lane, tires splashing through puddles. She barely parked before Elias opened the door and carried Noah inside. Nurses rushed forward, and the next minutes blurred into white light and clipped voices. "Code Blue Protocol. Appendicitis. Suspected. Prep the OR." Margaret stood frozen in the doorway, drenched from the rain, watching as they wheeled her son away. Elias stayed beside her, silent. When the automatic doors finally closed behind the gurney, she turned to him. "If you hadn't been there," her voice failed. He shook his head gently. "You'd have done the same for anyone you love." But Margaret knew that wasn't true. She'd spent so long managing everything, controlling, directing, fixing. that she'd forgotten how to simply trust. And now, a stranger in a janitor's uniform had reminded her of the one thing she'd almost lost: humility. Outside, thunder rolled over the mountains again, softer this time, like applause after a storm. The storm had passed, but the city hadn't yet caught its breath. By the time the first blush of dawn touched the mountains, the emergency room at Mission Hospital hummed with low voices, beeping monitors, and the rustle of nurses moving between curtains. Margaret sat in the waiting area, her hair damp, her silk blouse clinging to her shoulders. A paper cup of untouched coffee cooled in her hands. She'd signed every form they'd given her, nodded to every doctor who promised to do their best, and yet nothing seemed real. The world had shrunk to the sound of footsteps beyond the double doors and the hope that her son's name would be called with good news attached. Across the room, Elias stood by the vending machine, talking quietly with a nurse he knew. The faint familiarity between them, an old respect, did not escape Margaret. When he turned toward her, the fluorescent light caught the faint scar along his jaw, a quiet souvenir of another life. She realized she didn't even know his last name. He approached with the same calm presence he had in the car. "They're taking him into surgery," he said gently. "Dr. Monroe's one of the best. He'll be in good hands." Margaret blinked, trying to focus. "You know her?" Elias nodded. "We worked together, years ago, back when I was still running emergency calls. She was the attending on more than a few rough nights." Margaret studied him, the soaked uniform, the faint smell of cleaning solution mixed with rain. "You used to be an EMT?" "I was," he said simply, "before life took a different turn." The words carried weight, but he didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. Something about the way he said it, matter of fact, without bitterness, made her realize this was a man who'd learned to carry his past quietly. A silence stretched between them. Margaret stared at her coffee cup, the cardboard rim soft from her grip. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Elias Carter." She nodded slowly. "Margaret Hale." He gave a small, knowing smile. "Yeah, I figured." She looked up. "From what? My company?" "No," he said. "From how everyone looks at you, like they already owe you something." It wasn't an insult. It was observation, and for some reason, it stung. Margaret leaned back in the plastic chair, her gaze softening. "I don't think anyone owes me anything," she murmured. "But sometimes it's easier to pretend they do." Elias didn't respond. He just stood there a moment, the steady presence of someone who knew when silence healed more than words. Then he said quietly, "You should eat something. The cafe downstairs opens in 10 minutes. "I can't," she said. "Then at least stretch your legs. It'll help you breathe." The way he said it, practical, gentle, reminded her of the tone she used to reserve for Noah when he was frightened. It disarmed her. She rose, uncertain, and followed him down the corridor toward the small hospital cafe. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and coffee, that strange mix of fear and comfort found only in hospitals. The windows along the wall revealed Asheville waking up, damp rooftops glinting in pale morning light, fog curling between the trees. In the cafe, they sat opposite each other at a corner table. A sleepy cashier poured fresh coffee into heavy white mugs. Margaret cupped hers for warmth. "Why'd you stop?" she asked. Elias looked up from his cup. "Stop what?" "Being an EMT." He hesitated. "My wife was in a crash. I was off shift, but I was the one who found her. After that, I couldn't ride another ambulance without hearing her voice on the radio." Margaret's eyes widened, but he continued before she could speak. "So, I took a job where the nights were quiet, where saving things meant something simpler." He smiled faintly. "A floor polished right, a light that works when someone flips a switch that's order. Small, but still worth doing." For a long time, she said nothing. The clatter of dishes and the soft murmur of morning filled the space. Finally, she said, "I built my life around control. The idea that if I worked hard enough, I could stop anything bad from happening. Turns out, that's not how it works either." Elias nodded. "No, it isn't. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, that both had been broken by the same truth. Some things can't be fixed, only carried. From the intercom above, a nurse's voice called, "Surgical team to recovery. Patient Hale. Noah stable." Margaret's breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then she turned toward Elias, her eyes wide and wet. He's stable? Elias smiled softly. Told you she was the best. She exhaled shakily, pressing her hands together. The sound that escaped her was half laugh, half sob. Thank you, she whispered, voice trembling, for seeing what no one else did. He shook his head. You don't owe me thanks. Just make sure he gets that harvest fare you promised him. Margaret froze. How did you— I heard you mention it, he said with a small shrug. Kids remember promises. For a second, neither spoke. The morning light slipped through the cafe window, resting on their faces. Outside, the sky was clearing soft blue above the mountains, as if the storm had taken the weight of the night with it. When they returned to the recovery ward, the world felt smaller, quieter. Margaret's heels clicked softly against the tile as she followed Elias down the corridor. Every few steps, she glanced toward the numbered doors, afraid to look too hopeful. Through the glass of room 214, she saw Noah, pale but breathing steadily. His hair stuck damply to his forehead, but the faint color in his lips told her what she needed to know. Relief washed through her so sharply it made her knees weak. Dr. Rachel Monroe met them outside the room, her voice calm and reassuring.
Appendix rupture, but we caught it just in time. Another hour, and it might have been too late.
Margaret covered her mouth with one trembling hand. Thank you, she whispered. Rachel smiled. You should thank your friend here. He recognized the signs faster than most medics would have off the clock. Margaret turned to Elias. You saved my son's life. Elias shook his head. No, your son fought for it. I just happened to be standing close enough to listen. Rachel gave him a look that blended affection and admiration. Still humble, she said with a small laugh. You could have gone far, you know that? Elias smiled faintly. I did, just in a different direction. Margaret stood in silence for a moment, watching him, trying to reconcile the two images, the janitor with the mop bucket and the man who had just brought her child back from the edge. It made her heart ache in a way she didn't understand. Inside the room, Noah stirred. Mom? He murmured, voice fragile. Margaret rushed to his side. I'm here, sweetheart. His eyes fluttered open, dazed but alive. Did we make it? She laughed through tears. We did, baby. You're safe now. Elias lingered by the doorway, watching the reunion quietly. The tenderness between them stirred something deep in him, something both painful and beautiful. He thought of his own daughter, Lily, probably just waking up, rubbing her eyes, waiting for his call. He took a small step back, intending to leave without interrupting, but Margaret turned. Wait, she said softly. Will you stay? At least until he's asleep? Elias hesitated, then nodded. He found a chair near the window, where the morning light painted thin gold lines across the room. For a while, no one spoke. The only sounds were Noah's slow breaths and the faint hum of machines. After a few minutes, Margaret said quietly, You could have walked away last night. Most people would have. He looked out the window. Most people don't listen the way a parent does. She studied him. You're a father? Yeah, he said. A little girl. She's my world. Margaret nodded slowly. Then you understand. Elias smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. More than I wish I did. They sat in companionable silence as the sunlight grew brighter. The storm outside had passed completely, leaving the town washed clean, fresh, alive. Rachel stepped in briefly, checked Noah's vitals, and said, He'll need to rest for a few days, but he'll recover fine. She gave Elias a grateful look before leaving. Margaret reached for her bag, searching for words. I don't know how to repay you. Don't, he said gently. Just take him to that fair. Let him laugh. That'll be enough. She smiled faintly. You keep saying that. Because it matters, he said. When Noah finally drifted back to sleep, Margaret walked with Elias into the hallway. The light through the windows painted long reflections across the polished floor. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like running back to her phone, her meetings, her next victory. Maybe you're right, she said softly. Maybe what matters isn't what we build, but what we hold on to. Elias met her gaze, a quiet understanding between them. Sometimes, he said, it's both. As they stepped out into the morning air, the church bells of Asheville began to ring slow, deliberate chimes that carried across the valley. Margaret closed her eyes, and listened. The sound felt like forgiveness. Somewhere in that distant rhythm, she knew her life had shifted. The glass walls that once kept the world at bay were cracking, letting the light through. And just beyond that light, the man who had saved her son walked quietly into the day, unaware that their paths had only begun to cross. By afternoon, the sky above Asheville turned the color of pearl. The rain had gone, but the air still carried that clean scent that follows a storm, wet earth, pine, and something faintly sweet from the maple trees. Inside Mission Hospital, the world slowed to a different rhythm. Footsteps softened, voices dropped to whispers, and machines hummed with quiet patience. Margaret sat by Noah's bedside, her coat folded neatly over the chair beside her. Her son's small hand rested in hers, his skin warm now, color returning to his cheeks. A half-empty cup of apple juice sat on the tray, evidence that he'd eaten something for the first time in days. "Does it still hurt?" she asked softly. Noah shook his head. "Not really, just tired." "That's good," she said. "You scared me, you know." He smiled faintly. "I didn't mean to." From the doorway came a knock, gentle, hesitant. Elias stood there, his uniform freshly changed, hair still damp from washing up. He held 2 paper cups of coffee. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said quietly. Margaret looked up and smiled, genuinely this time. "You're not. Come in." He stepped inside, offering her a cup. "It's not the fancy stuff, but it's hot. After last night, I'll take anything hot," she said, wrapping her hands around the cup. Their fingers brushed for a moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, exhaustion, maybe something more tender than either expected. Noah looked at him curiously. "You're the man who helped me, right?" Elias nodded. "That's me. But you did the hard part." The boy grinned. "Mom says you used to be a doctor." Elias chuckled. "Not kite, just someone who drove fast and hoped not to break too much on the way." Margaret laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. "You're underselling it. Dr. Monroe said you saved lives for years." Elias shrugged, embarrassed. "She exaggerates." Noah turned toward him. "Will you come to the harvest fair with us next week?" Mom promised. Margaret's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard. "Noah," but Elias smiled. "That depends. Is there going to be cotton candy?" The boy nodded eagerly. "And apple pie. Then I'll think about it," Elias said. For the first time in days, the room filled with laughter. The kind of laughter that feels like sunlight after a long winter. When Noah dozed off again, Margaret leaned back in her chair, watching her son sleep. "He hasn't laughed like that in months," she whispered. "He's got good reason to now," Elias replied. She hesitated. "You really left that life behind? Medicine? Emergencies? All of it?" He looked out the window. "Yeah, some things you can't come back from. But you still knew exactly what to do," she said. He smiled faintly. "Some things don't leave you." Margaret studied him. There was a steadiness about this man, a quiet resilience that reminded her of the mountains outside, weathered, unshakable, and deeply human. "You must miss it sometimes," she said. Elias thought for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes, but I've got a little girl at home. She keeps me busy enough." Margaret's eyes softened. "She's lucky." He shook his head. "I'm the lucky one." For a while, neither spoke. The beeping monitors kept time, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, a nurse pushed a cart past the door, humming an old hymn under her breath. Finally, Margaret said quietly, "You ever think about going back to medicine?" Elias hesitated. "Not really. I wouldn't even know where to start." She looked at him, an idea forming somewhere behind her eyes. "Maybe the world still needs people who listen the way you do." He smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe the world just needs people who notice." They sat together in silence, the weight of shared exhaustion settling into something gentler, a peace neither of them had expected to find in a hospital room. The sun began to set, throwing long shadows across the floor. Margaret looked at the clock. "You should go home. You've been up all night." "I will," he said, standing. "Just wanted to make sure you two were okay." "We are," she said. "Thanks to you." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Elias?" He paused in the doorway. "You were right," she said softly. "Kids remember promises. I won't forget mine either." He nodded once, and for a moment their eyes met not as savior and stranger, but as two people standing on the same edge of something new. Outside, the sky deepened into the soft gold of early evening. Somewhere far below, a car horn sounded, faint and distant. Life was continuing, steady as ever, unaware that two of its quieter souls had just found a reason to start again. When Elias stepped out of the hospital, the air had cooled, carrying the faint hum of early evening. The sun had dipped low enough to turn the windows gold, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the strange lightness that follows doing something right. He stopped by the parking lot, watching a line of sparrows flutter above the power lines, their tiny wings beating in perfect rhythm. Somewhere behind him, a siren wailed distant, almost nostalgic, then faded into the mountain air. Driving home, the roads were quiet. Asheville stretched out before him, streets lined with oaks still dripping from the morning rain. He passed the same bakery where he sometimes bought cinnamon rolls for Lily, the same bookstore with the closed for renovation sign that had been there for months. Everything was the same, and yet, somehow, it wasn't. He thought of Margaret's face when Noah had opened his eyes, the way her shoulders collapsed, not from weakness but relief. He'd seen that look before years ago, on the night he'd lost Sarah, in the mirror of his own reflection. That kind of love never dies. It just learns to speak in quieter ways. When he reached home, the porch light was already on. Mrs. Delaney, his elderly neighbor, waved from her garden fence.
"Evening, Elias. Lily's been asking for you every 5 minutes."
He smiled tiredly. Wouldn't expect anything less. Inside, Lily ran straight into his arms.
"Daddy, you're late,"
she said, her voice a perfect mix of scolding and joy. I know, sweetheart. Something important came up. Did you fix it? He hesitated, then smiled. I think so. She squinted up at him. You smell like hospital soap. Occupational hazard, he said with a laugh. Now, how about dinner? They sat together at the kitchen table, a small, cozy space filled with mismatched dishes and the scent of tomato soup. Lily chattered about her school day, her art project, and the stray cat that kept showing up behind the playground. Elias listened, nodding, smiling, letting her voice fill the spaces that grief used to occupy. After dinner, he tucked her into bed. She clutched her stuffed bear, blinking sleepily. Daddy, she murmured, why do you help people when it makes you so tired? Elias brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Because once, someone helped me when I didn't even know I needed it. Like a superhero? She whispered. He smiled. Something like that. She yawned, her small voice fading. Then you're my superhero. He sat there long after she fell asleep, watching the rise and fall of her chest. The rhythm steadied him, anchoring him to the life he'd fought to keep simple. Later, out on the porch, he poured himself a cup of tea and let the night settle around him. The stars above the Blue Ridge shimmered faintly, and the air buzzed with the hum of crickets. He thought again of Margaret Hale, the poised, powerful woman who'd looked at him with gratitude that morning, stripped of every armor she'd ever worn. Something about her lingered in his mind, not as a fantasy, but as a reminder. Even the strongest people break, and sometimes the smallest kindness can hold them together. He didn't know that, at that same hour, Margaret sat by her apartment window overlooking the city lights, phone in hand, scrolling through an unfinished email addressed to him. She deleted it twice before typing a simple message. Thank you again. You reminded me what really matters. Her finger hovered. Then she hit send. Elias's phone buzzed on the porch railing. He read the message, smiled faintly, and replied, just doing what I've been taught. Pay attention to the signs. M. For a long moment, neither of them said more. The night deepened, carrying with it the quiet understanding that sometimes healing begins not with medicine, but with noticing, listening, and the courage to care. And in two separate homes, miles apart, a mother and a father sat in silence, both realizing that maybe life had just placed them in each other's path for a reason neither could name yet. The town slept, the stars watched, and somewhere in the middle of that stillness, two hearts, one mending, one remembering, began to beat in unspoken harmony. 3 days later, the morning light spilled over downtown Asheville, brushing against the tall glass windows of Hale Technologies headquarters. From her corner office on the 12th floor, Margaret watched the city awaken the steady flow of cars along Patton Avenue, the coffee carts steaming on the sidewalks, the faint silhouette of the Blue Ridge Mountains beyond the skyline. Her son was home now, recovering. The doctors had said he'd heal completely within a few weeks. And yet, even as she stood surrounded by the polished perfection of her empire, Margaret couldn't shake the memory of that night of Alias's calm voice, his steady eyes, his quiet certainty. The world inside Hale Technologies felt colder now. Her assistant, Dana, knocked lightly before entering. "Good morning, Miss Hale. The quarterly numbers are up 2%. The investors' call is at 10, and the board wants confirmation for your DC trip next week." Margaret nodded automatically. "Cancel the trip." Dana blinked. "Cancel? But the Whitehall partners—" "Can wait," Margaret interrupted. "My son needs me home." For once, saying it didn't feel like weakness. When Dana left, Margaret walked to her desk, where a framed photo of Noah smiled back at her. His hair was still mussed from the hospital pillow, his grin crooked. That picture, taken 2 mornings ago, felt more precious than every award on her shelf. Her intercom buzzed. "There's someone here to see you," the receptionist said. "Said you'd want to thank him in person. A Mr. Carter." Margaret's heart caught in her throat. "Send him up." Moments later, Elias stepped into her office, looking oddly out of place amid the glass and chrome. He wore clean jeans, a simple navy shirt, and carried his worn cap in his hands. The man who had looked so sure in an emergency now stood awkwardly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I came to drop this off," he said, holding out a small envelope. "Noah left his sketchbook in the hospital room. Thought he might want it." Margaret smiled, taking it. "Thank you. He'll be thrilled. He's been talking about you nonstop." Elias chuckled. "He's a good kid. Brave, too." She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Please, sit." He hesitated, glancing around the sleek office before lowering himself into the chair. "Not exactly my usual environment." "Emmer." "I imagine not," she said, smiling gently. "But I'm glad you came." A moment of silence followed, comfortable, but weighted. Margaret folded her hands, her tone soft. "I've been thinking about something, about what you said, that you left medicine, because life took a turn. I can't stop thinking about how much the world loses when people like you stop doing what they're meant to do." Elias looked down. "Sometimes the cost is too high." "I understand that," she said quietly. "But sometimes life gives us a second chance." He met her eyes, uncertain. "You mean?" Margaret took a breath. "I run a corporate medical program, small clinics for our employees, across the country. We're restructuring it. What we need isn't another administrator with a perfect resume. We need someone who understands people. Someone like you." He blinked. "You're offering me a job?" "Yes," she said. "Full-time, fixed hours, good benefits. You'd oversee staff wellness, first aid, safety training, health awareness. You'd have time for your daughter. And the pay would be, well, considerably better than Celestia's janitorial work." Elias leaned back, visibly caught between disbelief and caution. "That's generous. But why me?" "Because," she said softly, "you saved my son's life. And because I saw something in you I don't see often anymore. Someone who listens, not just hears." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Miss Hale, I appreciate it, truly. But I don't want charity." Her voice steadied. "This isn't charity, Elias. It's an opportunity for both of us. You said yourself that sometimes the world just needs people who notice. Well, that's exactly who I want working for me." He looked at her, searching for any sign of insincerity. There was none. Margaret leaned forward slightly. "I know what it's like to lose something and think that's the end of your story. But maybe it's just the part where you start helping someone else write theirs." For a long moment, Elias didn't speak. He stared out the window at the mountains rising in the distance, quiet, steady, timeless. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "That's all I ask," she replied with a smile. As he stood to leave, Margaret added softly, "And for what it's worth, I think your daughter would be proud." Elias paused at the door. The afternoon light caught the faint weariness in his face, but also something else, the first glimmer of hope he'd let himself feel in years. "Maybe," he said. "I hope so." When the door closed behind him, Margaret sat back in her chair, her pulse racing. She wasn't sure whether she'd offered him a job or something far more personal, a reason to believe again. She looked once more at the photo of Noah on her desk and whispered, "Maybe saving you was just the beginning." That evening, Elias came home to the soft glow of porch light and the scent of cinnamon from Mrs. Delaney's kitchen next door. Inside, Lily was sprawled on the couch coloring, her smile wide when she saw him. "You're home early," she said, running to hug him. "Guess I missed my favorite person," he replied, handing her a warm donut from the bakery. As she ate, Elias sat beside her, the memory of Margaret's offer still echoing in his mind, a chance to help again, to matter again. "Sweetheart," he began carefully, "how would you feel if I worked somewhere new, a place that helps people, but I'd still be home for bedtime?" She looked up, thoughtful. "Would it make you happy?" He smiled softly. "I think it might." "Then do it," she said. "You always tell me helping people is what makes us rich." He chuckled. "You've been listening too much." Later, after tucking her in, he stepped onto the porch, phone in hand. The night air smelled of pine and rain. He typed a short message. "About that job, I'd like to talk more." The reply came almost instantly. "I was hoping you'd say that," Margaret wrote. Elias looked up at the starlit sky, the weight of the past 7 years easing just a little. Somewhere across town, a mother sat by her son's bedside, reading the same message with a quiet smile. Neither of them knew where this path would lead, only that, for the first time in a long while, it finally felt like the right direction. The following morning, Asheville glowed under a crisp blue sky. Elias parked outside Hale Technologies, the building's mirrored glass reflecting the mountains behind it. He stood for a moment, hands in his pockets, before walking inside, half curious, half uncertain. When the elevator doors opened, Margaret was waiting. She wore soft gray, not the sharp black she used to hide behind. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said with a smile. "I wasn't sure either," he admitted. She led him through bright hallways lined with photos of employees volunteering and children holding thank you signs. "This is our wellness center," she said. "I want it to mean something again." Inside, the small clinic smelled faintly of lemon and coffee. Warm light spilled over a corkboard covered in hand-drawn cards from employees' kids. Elias ran his hand along the counter. "Feels different from the hospitals I knew," he said. "That's the point," Margaret replied. "People heal faster when they're seen." They stood in quiet for a while, the hum of the air conditioner, the only sound. Then she said, "If you want the job, it's yours. Monday start, regular hours, benefits for you and your daughter." Elias let out a breath. "You don't waste time." "I can't afford to," she said, eyes soft. "Not after what almost happened." He hesitated. "And you're sure about me?" She met his gaze. "I'm sure you still have a gift. You just forgot it was allowed to be used." He didn't answer right away. The mountain light glinted off the window. For a heartbeat, he saw himself years ago, a man who'd once known how to save lives. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Monday." A quiet relief crossed her face. "Good. And Elias?" He turned. "Thank you not just for Noah, but for reminding me what leadership is supposed to feel like." He smiled a little shy. "Guess we're both learning how to start over." When the elevator doors closed behind him, Margaret stood in the stillness of the clinic, heart strangely full. Outside, the sunlight caught the mountain peaks, and somewhere between them, two lives that had once run parallel had finally begun to cross. By the time Elias drove back across town, the late afternoon sun had softened into gold. He rolled down the window, letting the wind carry the faint scent of wood smoke and mountain pine. For once, the weight on his chest felt lighter. At home, Lily was waiting on the porch steps, a book in her lap and her hair glowing in the light. "You look happy," she said as he climbed the steps. "Maybe I am," Elias answered, sitting beside her. "Got some news." She perked up. "Good or bad?" "Good. I took a new job." Her eyes widened. "Really? Doing what?" "Helping people again, just in a calmer way this time." She leaned her head against his arm. "Mom would like that," she whispered. He smiled. "Yeah, I think so too." They sat quietly for a while, watching the sky turn the color of amber tea. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's wind chime sang softly. Across town, Margaret stood by her kitchen window, stirring a pot of soup while Noah drew pictures at the table. She paused when her phone buzzed a message from Elias. "Thank you again for believing in me." She read it twice, then typed back. "We both needed someone to." Her reflection in the glass looked softer than it had in years, not the hard-edged CEO, but a woman relearning how to trust the world again. Outside, the church bells of downtown Asheville began to ring slow, steady notes that echoed across the valley. Elias looked toward the sound, closed his eyes, and whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what healing sounds like." And as dusk settled, two homes miles apart glowed with the same quiet warmth, a single mother and a single father, each finding faith again in small beginnings. The following Saturday, the Asheville Harvest Fair opened under a bright sky. The air smelled of apple cider and caramel corn, and laughter floated through the crisp mountain breeze. Striped tents lined the town square, and a folk band played on the gazebo stage. Elias walked hand in hand with Lily, her excitement lighting up every step. She wore a red flannel shirt and carried a paper bag of kettle corn almost as big as her. "You promised the Ferris wheel first," she reminded him. "Ferris wheel it is," he said, grinning. Halfway through the line, he spotted a familiar figure near the apple pie booth. Margaret, dressed casually in jeans and a soft cream sweater, her son Noah tugging at her hand. For a moment, the world stilled. She noticed him too and smiled. "You made it?" "Couldn't break a promise," Elias said. "Hi, Noah," the boy grinned. "You came? Mom said you'd be too busy saving people." "Not today," Elias chuckled. "Today's for pie." Lily shyly offered Noah some popcorn. Within minutes, the two children were laughing, running toward the game stalls. Watching them, Margaret said softly, "They look like they've known each other for years." "Kids don't need years," Elias replied. "Just kindness." "Oh." They wandered through the fair together. Easy conversation slipping between them, talk of small things, recipes, school stories, and the stubborn traffic near the office. Each word built something quiet but real. When the Ferris wheel lifted them into the golden air, Asheville spread out below the hills like velvet, the streets glowing with autumn leaves. Margaret looked down at the children waving from below and whispered, "I can't remember the last time I felt this normal." Elias glanced at her. "Maybe it's not normal. Maybe it's just good." She smiled, the wind brushing her hair across her face. "Good," she said softly. "I'll take that." For a moment, the world seemed perfectly still, the kind of stillness that makes you believe in second chances. Down below, the fair band began another song, and the scent of roasted peanuts drifted up through the air. The wheel turned slowly, carrying them higher, two parents who had lost so much, now finding a kind of peace neither expected to deserve. When they stepped off, the children ran toward them, hands sticky with melted ice cream, faces glowing with joy. Margaret laughed, brushing sugar from Noah's chin, and Elias couldn't help but think that happiness, when it came, always looked messy and real like this. As the sun began to set, the fair lights blinked on one by one, stringing the square in warm amber glow. Margaret turned to him. "I'm glad you came, Elias." "So am I," he said quietly. "Feels like life's been trying to hand both of us a do-over." She smiled. "Then maybe we should stop resisting it." And for the first time, Elias didn't look away. As twilight deepened, the fair shimmered beneath strings of golden lights. Children's laughter mixed with fiddle music, and the scent of cinnamon apples hung in the air. The crowd began to thin, replaced by families lingering near the bonfire at the edge of the field. Elias and Margaret sat on a wooden bench, 2 paper cups of cider steaming in their hands. The children, Lily and Noah, were busy helping volunteers hand out slices of pie to the last few guests, faces glowing with pride. "They make a good team," Margaret said softly. Elias smiled. "They do. Kids usually figure out what we adults take years to learn, how to share joy without asking for anything back." Margaret watched her son for a long moment. "I used to think I had to control everything. Work, time, even him. But now, maybe all I need to do is show up." "You showed up when it mattered," Elias said gently. "That's what counts." The fire crackled, sending sparks toward the darkening sky. A band began playing a slow waltz nearby, and couples drifted into the open space, dancing barefoot in the grass. Lily tugged her father's sleeve. "Dance with us, Daddy." He laughed. shaking his head. I don't dance.
Neither do I, Margaret said, smiling. But maybe tonight's for trying. A few minutes later, the four of them moved together near the firelight, awkward at first, then easy, laughter carrying over the music. Elias spun Lily once, her giggle ringing like a bell. Margaret and Noah joined hands beside them, the rhythm soft and human. When the song ended, Margaret looked at him, the man who had once been a stranger in a hospital hallway. You know, she said quietly, I used to think strength meant never needing help. You changed that. Elias's voice was low. You taught me something, too, that helping someone doesn't mean you stop healing yourself. They stood there for a moment, just breathing in the night air, warm light flickering across their faces. The Ferris wheel turned slowly behind them, its lights tracing soft halos through the sky. As they walked the children toward the parking lot, Margaret stopped him. Elias, she said, what if we stop pretending our lives are on different sides of the same road? He met her eyes. Then maybe it's time to build a bridge. Huh? Lily slipped her small hand into Noah's, and the two ran ahead, laughing. Watching them, Margaret whispered, Looks like they already did. Elias smiled, quiet. Sure. Then I guess we just follow their lead. The fair behind them glowed, like a memory a little imperfect, a little magical, the way all beginnings should be. A few months later, winter brushed Asheville with its first dusting of snow. The mountains stood silent under a pale sky, and the town glowed with holiday lights strung between lampposts and cafe windows. At Hale Wellness Center, a small Christmas tree twinkled in the corner of Elias's new office. He sat at his desk, finishing reports, while the faint sound of carolers floated up from the street below. On the wall hung two photos, one of Lily and Noah laughing at the harvest fair, the other of his late wife Sarah, smiling beneath the same mountains years ago. Between them sat a simple wooden cross, not a symbol of faith exactly, but of memory. A knock on the door pulled him back. Come in, he said. Margaret stepped inside, wrapped in a soft green coat. You're still working? Trying to keep your empire healthy, he teased. She smiled. You're doing better than I ever did. People actually like coming here now. He closed his folder and leaned back, watching her. You should take credit for that. She shook her head gently. No. You reminded me what leadership really is: care first, everything else follows. They stood for a moment in comfortable silence, the kind that comes when two lives have learned to breathe in the same rhythm. How's Noah? Elias asked. Healthy, she said softly, and happier than I've seen him in years. He and Lily have become inseparable. She even convinced him to join her school choir. He laughed. That sounds like her. Margaret stepped closer, her voice keyed now. Elias, I used to think the miracle was that you saved my son's life. But that wasn't it, was it? He looked at her, puzzled. The real miracle, she said, was what came after the way you showed us how to live again, how to slow down, listen, and actually be present. Elias swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe that's what healing really is, not the medicine, the noticing. Outside, snow began to fall thin, flakes drifting lazily through the air. Margaret turned toward the window. Do you ever think about how strange it is? Two strangers meeting in the middle of a storm, changing everything for each other? Every day, he said simply. For a while, neither moved. The world outside was still wrapped in white and the sound of distant bells. Finally, Margaret spoke again, her tone soft but sure. You once told me you gave up medicine because of what it cost you. I think maybe it brought you here instead. He smiled. Guess I just took the long way back. From the hallway came the quick patter of footsteps, Lily and Noah, laughing as they carried a plate of cookies between them. We brought snacks, Lily announced proudly, for the best team in the building. Elias grinnet. Team, huh? Margaret knelt beside the children. That's right. Family team. The word hung in the air, simple, certain, real. Elias met her gaze, and for the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. They sat together around the small desk, sharing cookies and stories while the snow fell heavier outside. The office lights glowed golden against the winter dusk. When it was time to leave, Margaret slipped on her gloves and said, We're lighting the tree downtown tonight. You two should come. Elias glanced at Lily. Her eager smile gave him the answer before he could speak. "We'll be there," he said. As they stepped outside, the snow crunched softly underfoot. The town square shimmered with lights, the tree standing tall in the center, a beacon against the cold. Music drifted through the crowd, warm and familiar. Margaret stood beside him, her hand brushing his just slightly. He didn't pull away. "You know," she said, eyes on the lights, "for years I thought redemption meant erasing the past, but maybe it just means learning to live with it and love again anyway." Elias nodded, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Yeah, maybe that's the quiet miracle." The children's laughter echoed through the square, rising with the music. And under the soft glow of the Christmas lights, two people who had lost everything finally found what they didn't know they were searching for. Not perfection, not answers, but peace. The kind of peace that stays. Sometimes, life brings people together in the most unexpected ways. A janitor with a quiet heart, a woman who'd forgotten how to slow down, and two children who reminded them both what family truly means. In a world that often rewards noise, their story whispered something simple, that healing doesn't always arrive with grand gestures, but through small acts of kindness repeated every day. Elias never set out to be anyone's hero. He only wanted to raise his daughter with honesty, to live one good day at a time. Yet his kindness reached further than he knew. It softened a mother's fear, rebuilt a child's laughter, and brought light back into a home that had long been dimmed by loneliness. Margaret learned that redemption doesn't erase the past, it transforms it. Sometimes, the second chance you give someone else is the one you needed all along. Their journey reminds us that love, real love, isn't about perfection, but presence. It's in a father's steady voice, a mother's willingness to begin again, a child's laughter echoing through a kitchen on a snowy morning. Like the scent of coffee and cinnamon drifting from an old diner, it lingers long after the moment has passed. Lesson: unconditional kindness has the power to change lives. Everyone deserves to be seen, to be loved, and to belong. True happiness doesn't come from wealth or success, but from the warmth we share and the bridges we build. As we grow older, we learn sometimes too late that the smallest gesture of compassion can carry more weight than a lifetime of achievements. Just like a porch light left on for someone coming home, a simple act of care can guide us through even our darkest nights. And in that gentle glow, we realize the truth this story has whispered all along. Forgiveness, love, and family are not rewards to be earned, they are gifts we give, freely and without fear. So tonight, as the music fades and the fire burns low, take a moment to think about your own story. Who have you forgiven? Who still waits for your call? If this story touched your heart, press 1 in the comments, and if you think it could be told better, press 0 and share your thoughts. After all, stories like this aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be shared, heart to heart.